Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 4 of Cruise Conversations. Thank you for joining us today. We have a very special cruise ship hospitality episode today. So for those of you that don't know, we organize 2 events in 2 continents, cruise ship interiors and cruise ship hospitality. This is our first webinar for the cruise ship hospitality event. The title is The Future of Cruise Operations and Cruise Hospitality. Today, I am joined with 3 panelists for the session. We have 3 people that represent different areas within the industry. I'll let them introduce themselves, tell us a bit about them, what they do, and over to you guys.
Okay, thank you, Toby, and thank you, Cruise Ship Hospitality. So my name is Steve Fryers. I am a consultant to the cruise lines. My specialism is on the interior fit out of cruise ships and running projects overall for the refurbishment and modernization to large luxury cruise ships.
Yeah. Excellent.
Good afternoon. I'm Michael Rollins. Sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, just to comment on that. And Steve, you've created a lot of conversation on social media recently since the pandemic, which is why we'd love to have you on the session. So yeah, I just wanted to put that in there. Sorry, Michael.
Yeah, thank you.
No, that's okay. Yeah. No, good afternoon. Michael Rollins from the UK. My background is as a consultant in environmental inspection control. And over the COVID period, I've been using that experience to evaluate the impact on non-healthcare facilities, including prisons for my sins, and also into the commercial space. I did have the opportunity to look at the Princess Diamond case, and it's an interesting subject to look at how we can improve infection prevention in that space. So I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Perfect. Last but not least. Oh, he's not put himself on mute, is he?
I think he may have.
He may have put himself on mute.
Oops.
No. Wait there.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys, it's a technical glitch, the first one we've had ever. So we'll give ourselves this. What's he done?
It was all working so well earlier.
That is bizarre.
Yeah, very strange.
Come on, Eric, you've got this. You've got this. Where's your IT department when you need it, eh? Okay, guys, we'll let him figure this out, but we will get on with the session. So I'll introduce Erik. So Erik Schobesberger with Almaco. Erik is part of the modernization refurbishment team within Almaco, which are an interior outfitting company, working with all of the big cruise lines, and he will be with us in just a second. So the focus of today's session is the future of cruise ship hospitality. We're going to look at various parts of the hotel operations sort of department, and we'll do 40 minutes of general talk, and then we'll go on to a 5 to 10 minute Q&A with the panelists. So to kick us off then, guys, the first thing that we want to talk about is what are some of the likely changes that we're going to see when we talk about hotel operations. So we keep seeing online that, the future of the buffet, the restaurant layout. What are some of the key things that we're going to see, Steve, would you say, when we return to cruise?
I would say that the buffet is one area that I believe a lot of people will be looking at, obviously because of the ease of contamination with the self-service side of that. What that will be, I think, is still to be determined. I think a lot of the lines are all looking at that. I don't see that the buffet is going to go away. And in fact, I read recently, I think it was RCL, their head of F&B came out with stating that it is not going away. Right. However, I do see that it will change, but just how that is going to be, possibly more waiter service at the actual stations, where you will come along, ask what you would like to have, and then they will be serving it for you, and then you will leave. So that's the possibility. I think that we will see changes there for sure.
Yeah. So if we talk about the buffet from a health point of view, what would you say, Michael, is actually the reason that people are considering removing buffets? What is it?
Gentlemen, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes,
Oh, wonderful, thank you. I managed to solve the problem.
Okay.
Okay, good. Congratulations. It's really about this issue of cross-contamination between individuals and the service area. However, as being a passenger on the ships, I've been very curious, and I've called around ships at odd hours of the morning and day, looking at how cleaning takes place, and they're actually excellent. They're very, very good. And I think it's really a matter of logistics now in terms of numbers and concentration of those numbers. I think hygiene standards can be achieved. It's just looking at the behavioral aspects of the passengers and controlling them in a way. And, this is an area where things like smart buildings, potentially smart ships will come into play, where it will detect concentrations of people. And I've read of, certain sensors now that are being investigated, where you can actually identify potential risk factors developing in terms of concentration of people, which are beyond, what would be the successful, a suitable threshold for concentration. But I think, the buffet is part of the cruise ship experience. And I think it's a challenge to resolve that, but I think it's an important challenge to be resolved.
Yeah. And Erik, now that we've got you back, so you guys, Almaco are well known for playing a role in the sort of the galley area of a ship. What would you comment on the future of the buffet, if you could summarize?
Yes, well, I mean, this is indeed a very complex subject, and like Michael said, I mean, it's all about the logistics and controlling the flow of people. And obviously we are still learning very much about the coronavirus and how it spreads, but of course, having a self-serve buffet, which has been very long like a quintessential part of the cruise experience, is a very potential. I mean, people crowd there. They're very close to each other. There's no natural social distancing. Plus, people actually touch, the same surfaces all the time, So we have ourselves thought that there will be several phases, essentially because it's very difficult, to make big changes to existing buffets at the moment. So we have come up with several solutions. One of them are these self-disinfecting surfaces by using different methods, for example, photocatalytic nanocoatings, installing better sneeze guards, and of course, it's possible to remove one potential source of contamination by having, you still have the buffet lines, but instead of, each passenger taking the food by him or herself, the food is being handed out by personnel who wear protective equipment. Protective equipment, because that minimizes the touching of any surfaces. So we have solutions available there, but I think in the short term it will be that if buffets are allowed to be used, there will be more sneeze guards, better sneeze guards. The food will be handed over, and there will be different ways to control the flow of people. I mean, at the first stage, just markings on the floor like you have in your supermarket, gas station, wherever, that people keep their distance. The flow of people will be only in one direction, so that you don't run into each other. But in the longer term, of course, we have to think more about, can we make can we make some sort of like barriers, to further control the flow of people and make social distancing, to come more naturally.
Yeah. I also think you can look at it also with regards to similar to the way the older style main dining rooms used to work. You will have several sittings, so you can limit the number of people who will be in the area at a single point of time.
Yeah. So we've talked about the layout in the buffet area. So would you say that the whole contactless ordering of food, I mean, are the cruise lines trying to limit the amount of contact between passengers, crew? Steve, would you say that that's what they're looking at?
I would say from what I'm reading, I would say that that is, yes, the case, that they are trying to look at minimizing the interaction between not just passenger to passenger, but also passenger to crew. As we all know, this virus is spread by human contact. Therefore, the more you can limit that or keep distances between people, then the less likelihood you have of actually having an outbreak on board a ship. So I would say that that's definitely a major player in the thinking of the various companies and the specialists that they have. I'm sure Michael could probably comment better on this from a medical perspective as to the distancing and how well it actually works.
Yes. So Michael, on that topic then, getting down the amount of touch points within the passengers and the crew, how much does that, ease the spread of the virus? Is that the most important thing?
Yes, but there are 2 contact points. There's not only the surfaces, it's the hands. And part of our work at the moment is investigating surface modification of skin, so that we actually have antimicrobial surface to antimicrobial surface. It's an equal and opposite equation. Dirty hands contaminate environments, environments contaminate hands. So if we can place a barrier between the two, so anything that is shared would not be contaminated easily by an individual touching something. But I agree that the further we can make everything touchless, it is better. And in terms of selection, I think that there will be a certain amount of requirement for masking to limit any aerosol generation between people in close proximity until they sit at their table, when they can then relax and enjoy, within a controlled environment. So it's really the serving aspect, and I guess I'm envisaging the fast food delivery by staff behind the counter, where you select what you want and they will serve to you, or potentially ordering from the table and having that delivered to the table. But obviously that's a staffing issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So then the next thing that we were talking about is one of the impacts, initially could be the reduced passenger numbers. And we've seen it on social media, various reports that, was it 60, 65%, I think they were saying. Now, what would you say to that, Steve? I mean, have you any comment on reduced passenger numbers?
Well, up until late last week, anything that I was reading was sort of talking about reduced passenger numbers, as you say, 60, 65%. But I've read recently that both Norwegian, Royal, and Carnival have all come out stating that they need a certain number of ships and 100% capacity on those ships in order to have a break-even point. So I'm not sure why that, well, shouldn't say not sure why. Financially, I can see why that is the case. However, how that is going to go down with CDC and the experts, and they're giving permission for cruise lines to go back into service, will be yet to be seen. Obviously, there's a lot of high-level meetings going on with the cruise lines and CDC to set out their requirements and their proposals for getting back to service. I'm sure that's all part of those conversations. So it'll be interesting to see over the next week or two whether that continues to be the case, that they're stating 100% capacity.
Yeah. Would any of you guys add to that on the capacity numbers?
Yeah, well, I mean, one point I'd like to add is, I mean, if we look at the first guidelines that are available out there in the public, which is the EU Healthy Gateways guidelines, is that they have also specified that on a cruise, that in case your maximum 24 hours away of being able to evacuate sick passengers or crew, you have to have 1% of cabin space available on a single occupancy basis. Meaning, if you have let's say 1,000 passengers on the vessel, you would need to have that, how much does it make, 10 cabins available for isolating those passengers. And if it's more than 24 hours, it has to be 5%. So in case the CDC adopts something similar to those EU guidelines, then that would already reduce somewhat the capacity of the the capacity of the vessel. But
Yeah.
but those are, I mean, we are now seeing the first cruises starting in, I mean, some are already happening in Norway, but now there will be some of those big cruise ships. The first place where I have seen them returning is in Germany. And apparently, you know, both IDA from the Carnival Group as well as TUI, which is affiliated with RCCL, they have agreed upon the German authorities that, you know, they implement similar rules, and they have an evacuation plan in case there is an outbreak on board. And those ships will mainly be sailing very close to Germany, so evacuation within 24 hours should be, I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's certainly achievable.
So we are seeing a lot more of the cruise lines announcing some of the more basic protocols, I'll say. You know, increased cleaning we're seeing, and we're seeing, you know, Virgin announced, I saw it today on LinkedIn, they were saying about they're looking for a COVID test that can give them a much faster response, whether they have the infection or not. Michael, what is currently out there in terms of a COVID test? How fast do you get the results at the moment?
Well, as you're aware, this has been a major problem for many countries in terms of the ability to turn tests around. And as I mentioned, the issue is false negatives and also false positives. That the reliability of the testing, I think, is still somewhat suspect. And the value of whether you're considering daily testing on board of every patient, I mean, that would be a massive undertaking to do. And as I say, if you're visiting many ports, potentially mingling with other populations, you know, that puts people at risk. And, you know, it's really defining how cruises now will actually be, you know, scheduled within what could be termed safe countries, where the infection rate is low enough to be acceptable to meet that threshold of acceptability.
Yeah. But one thing I wonder about is the aspect of when a cruise ship, say, operating in the Caribbean, is probably the better example. If they do have an outbreak, and obviously the best thing is to get that person or persons off the ship as quick as possible, and to a medical facility shoreside where proper care can be given. But just how many of the islands will be prepared to take them? Yeah. That is something which I don't think, or I haven't seen anything being talked about with regards to that. So that's something I'm sort of looking for in the guidelines that the cruise lines are working on themselves to see whether they have plans in place for that.
On the topic of self-isolation,
somewhat political.
Correct.
That's a somewhat political situation also. The countries and the robustness of their health system, they choose not to cooperate for their own safety.
Correct. Yes.
So in the meantime, if you look at, you know, a potential outbreak on a ship, have they currently got spaces for passengers to quarantine?
I would say that that's an easy one to do. You can put aside a number of cabins in an isolated area within one particular fire zone, say, and you can use that as your isolation area until you get passenger or to a port where you can disembark those persons off the vessel. You can put in various measures to those cabins, such as the HEPA AC systems, different cleaning systems. There's spray systems out there, misting systems. There's various things you can do to keep that area somewhat safe, and the persons that have a possible infection retained in that area, so that the spread does not get to the rest of the vessel.
And would you say,
maybe just add to what Stephen said? I mean, that's finding those cabins and having a certain area of cabins. That is something which is quite easy to plan. But I think one and the other issue is then how do we control access to that area? How can we be sure that the protocols, that we don't have any people with who are sick or have been exposed to the virus, that they don't just leave and go wandering around? I think in Australia there have been now a couple of those cases, like where they isolated everybody coming from abroad in some hotels, but because the the access control procedures, as well as especially the security personnel handling those areas. They were in too close contact with some of the people infected and got infected themselves. So this is of course, it's not only about the area, but also controlling, you know, the vectors, which is essentially the people going in and out of that area.
Yes.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah. Michael, would you add anything?
Isolation, yeah, isolation is a relatively simple thing to undertake, and you know, working with, as you say, HEPA filtration and negative air pressure, converting those rooms to be suitable, you know, infectious isolation rooms would not be challenging. As you say, it's a matter of identifying the areas that they would be, and ideally they'd be close to the medical center. And those could be controlled and monitored. It's really the exposure of other individuals to those individuals that have been isolated. It's the track and trace issue all over again.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, on the point of isolation rooms, do you think the future, and you guys, you know, Steve and Erik, you guys are in this business, do you think the future of the layout of a cruise ship will factor in these isolation rooms? Do you think that is if you look at the new build market, do you think they're going to start looking at this as areas on the ship that they just block out for that? Go on, you've got to go first.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's a cost issue, of course, as well. I mean, you never have too much room on board a ship, and obviously, I mean, if those have to be put aside, you know, those areas, you know, just in case, that's essentially an area that does not really generate any revenue. So I think, you know, we need to have more tangible guidelines about what is really required. I mean, this pandemic, of course, is one thing, but I mean about future outbreaks as well. You know, how quickly are we able to react? How do you react when there is a potential new epidemic or pandemic? So I think it's we might see it, but like I said, it's of course a cost issue as well.
Yeah. I'll be even blunter. I don't think you will.
No.
I think it's going to come down to pure cost, and to have cabins set aside is not cost effective. So I don't think so. They may retrofit some of those cabins with HEPA systems, etc., to give them that option should they require them, where they can move guests which are healthy out of certain cabins and move those that have got an illness into those cabins, so that the air systems, etc., in there are able to maintain it isolation as such. But I don't see it being that they will have a area of a vessel set aside with cabins empty. That will be for the off chance that should something happen that they need to use those.
Yeah.
I mean, it's quite possible that you could have active disinfection, air disinfection with a number of cabins, where you can actually purify air on demand and create the Cordona effect within that area to reduce any viral load. And it combines with UVC irradiation, cold plasma, irradiation of the air. Those could be fitted in somehow.
That brings me to the next topic that I really want to talk about is this enhanced cleaning that we keep hearing from all of the brands. You know, it's been probably one of the most talked about things that people are, you know, when it comes to cleaning the rooms after the guests have left. Michael, tell us, what does this mean and how does it work and what are they likely to be doing?
Well, having experienced cruising, I'm always amazed at the rapid turnover of the ship. That you know the passengers are waiting to get on as you disembark. So it's a massive challenge to decontaminate, I would say, an environment as we currently understand it. And that's where surface modification and looking at some of the very efficient cleaning technologies come into their own. You know, as you're aware, I've been doing a lot of work with Osprey Deep Clean in terms of their dry steam vapor process. But the reason I mention that is that similar to healthcare, when we started using lots of hand gel, we became, contaminating our environment with the residue of hand gel, and that in itself created a contamination which was much more effective in terms of cross-contamination of bacteria to hand. So you do one thing and it knocks on to something else. And so the ability to bring everything back to ground zero is very desirable. And that's where steam cleaning and things like microfiber can be very efficient at removal, at very effective removal of surface contamination. And then you have your second level of disinfection. But if you're disinfecting at a low level, because you don't want these cabins reeking of chemistry, you don't want the surfaces with residues of tacky material, with residual activity, as it's claimed. Cleaning is just fun. Disinfection only lasts for the moment. As soon as the passengers arrive, the cycle of contamination starts all over again. And this is where the enhanced cleaning, while passengers are actively involved in their daytime activity, it will also contribute. We've got to keep the bioburden at a very low level.
Right. Wow. So and how what are some of the things that we're likely to see when it comes to the passengers out of their cabin? Are we talking steam cleaning the curtains? Are we talking spraying the beds? What are the sort of the key areas that are going to need to be cleaned whilst the passenger's out to sort of reset?
It's mainly the hand touch points. That's where the main areas of cross contamination take place, and obviously the sanitary areas. But mainly I see the deep cleaning as being a process that, on the discharge side of things. But obviously manual cleaning can be very, very effective. As I say, to really focus on those frequent touch points of the cabin. And again, this is where antimicrobial surface modification can be very useful. Photocatalytics, very well recognized, particularly, if you're in the sunshine. I believe that's the mode of action, that you excite the free radicals with UV, and that you can actually disturb organisms that may be on that surface. There are other antimicrobials also that can actually change the surface and improve cleanability of that surface, and also prevent any colonization by microbes. But as I mentioned before, it's very important to understand that hands are the culprit. So, more than just disinfecting the hands is, I think, creating antimicrobial contact between hands and surfaces is a strategy that could be very successful, and that's the focus of our work at the moment.
Very good.
But,
And
clean surfaces help with clean hands.
Steve, I have one for you. We're seeing, you're part of the interiors community as well. We're hearing a lot of people talk about antimicrobial fabrics and materials and textiles.
Yes.
How likely is it that the cruise lines are going to look at their ships and say, okay, out with all the old stuff and let's replace everything with new antimicrobial, antiviral materials?
Initially, I would say that it's very unlikely because of the cost to do so. I think you will see it then possibly coming into play when the vessels go in for refurbishment or new builds. It will probably come into thinking, I think, on the new build side more at this stage, where they will look at that type of material to use. But certainly to go back in now to a ship that's 5 years old, 10 years old, and to start ripping everything apart to put these materials in, it's just not cost effective.
Right. And Erik, if we look at this from a new build point of view, if the ship's been designed and the furniture and fabrics companies have been specified and they're not antimicrobial, do you think there's a likelihood that the shipyard will look at that, or the cruise line will look at that and say, okay, let's reconsider our options, and almost the companies that can provide that technology in fabrics gets another chance at being specified?
Well, that's I've actually been in some contact with one of the major European shipyards now, and they're definitely looking very much into this. It's I'd say it depends, what is the phase of the construction of the vessel it is currently in. I mean, if it's already being outfitted, if all the materials have been ordered and paid for, that's another thing than for this completely new. And I mean, well, we're obviously talking mostly about COVID-19. It's also about the other potential source of diseases is the norovirus, which has been plaguing the cruise industry for quite a long time. despite a lot of effects having been done to fight it. But I mean, what we believe in, and this is one of the reasons why we started offering these photocatalytic nanocoating solutions, is that using this technology, you can also treat existing surfaces and materials, and essentially make them under the right conditions, obviously, also antimicrobial, which is a much faster and lower cost alternative to ripping out all the fabrics or completely specifying new fabrics.
Right. Yeah. And Michael, would you comment on that from a health point of view, a scientific point of view?
Yes. No. I think it's a strategy which is very relevant, and we're not just talking about COVID. We're talking about all sorts of environmental pathogens. Particularly some of the gram negatives with E. coli being an issue in terms of food surface, etc. I think that protection and prevention is the key word, and an understanding of human behavior and what we need to do to help people to protect themselves. And obviously, we can't arrange people to stop touching things, but at the very least, if we can inhibit bacterial or microbiological contamination, that it doesn't proliferate, that you stop it in its tracks. Okay, it's there, but it's not moving, then we have containment. And I say colonization and growth of bacteria and duplication within the environment is one of the critical factors. So antimicrobial or biostatic surfaces are very, very useful, in my opinion. Yeah.
I would just say one thing there that I think I don't necessarily believe you have to put all sort of as many surfaces as you can with those materials. I think you need to be strategic and look at the surfaces that are touched most. I mean, I can think of two, which would be stairwells, the handrails there, and corridors where you have the handrails. So those sort of surfaces, I think, are sort of ones which, to me, it makes common sense. Those would be the ones that you would try to use a material such as that. Not necessarily every surface needs to be.
Any comment on that, guys?
I think there's a lot of copper used on ships. Is that correct?
Sorry, Michael?
I believe there's a lot of copper. Like thinking the handrails, the beautiful balustrades coming down.
Yes. Yeah. There can be on some ships, not all, but some have. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
It goes back to a design trend as well, doesn't it? If that's a material that's useful, it goes back to the design. So the next thing, guys, I wanted to talk about is the HVAC systems. So we're seeing again a lot of content online where people are saying that you can make certain modifications to the air conditioning units. Erik, what are you guys doing? What are you hearing, and what is it that you guys are involved with this?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of, I mean, Almaco as such, we are not really an HVAC company. We coordinate a lot with HVAC companies, and we have been looking also at the different technologies. I mean, if we very briefly, I mean, there's the three main technologies we have looked at, and which seem to be the most proliferated in the industries. First of all, I mean, is the filters. Improving the filtration. However, there you have the problem that the denser the filter you install, the more you start getting back pressure there, so that hampers the airflow, and that's that. So that can be, especially on existing vessels, that can be a major issue. That because the HVAC system has not been designed from the start on to handle these high density HEPA filters or filters with a high MERV rating, so that you don't get the necessary airflow anymore, which obviously has many other negative consequences. There is the possibility, of course, to use different types of, for example, UV lighting, and we are now together with our partner company, we are doing an experiment for one cruise line, where we are actually coating those filters with this photocatalytic nanocoating, and installing, because obviously it is dark inside those HVAC ducts, so the photocatalytic coating won't work by itself because there is no light to activate it. is to have UV lights installed there. So that would be more, or at least we hope that would be much more effective than just having an UV light there, by creating more of these free radicals. And then what Virgin, for example, is doing is that they are introducing those air ionization systems in the HVAC system. So you could say basically both have the same end effect. They create free radicals which break up, organic matter, meaning microbes, molds, whether it's viruses, bacteria, whatever, but just using two different kinds of technology to achieve that. So there, but like I said, I think the main issue there is that especially on existing ships, you cannot hamper the current airflow volumes too much.
Yeah. Stephen, would you add anything?
Yeah. I think Erik's totally correct there with regards to, it's not just a simple case of going in and adding these systems. You have to look at the overall system that is there. Some of these ships are 20 years old. So the systems that they have in place are not as efficient as what a new ship a year old has currently on board. So it may make it very difficult to actually add the systems on to each of the ships. So I think, again, in considering all of these systems and chemicals and processes that people are referring to and talking about, I don't actually think there's going to be a one size fits all, shall we say.
Right.
I think it's going to be a combination. So be it HEPA filters, be it UVC lighting, be it cleaning, be it misting systems. I think it's going to be a combo throughout. I don't see it being just one system added that will be the solution for COVID or any other, viruses out there.
And Michael, on the subject of HVAC, then, if we're talking about these systems, sounds like a costly exercise to rip out one system and put a new one in. How much of an impact does that make? The actual air inside the room, we hear, airborne, or, a lot in the news. Is it one of the key things we need to change?
No, I would have to agree with Stephen and Erik, is that you have to work with your existing facilities. I think it's the false economy to try and modify something which is not fit for purpose in terms of that modification. I think a much more deliverable is education for the passenger in terms of their responsibility, in terms of their own healthcare, and the reporting procedures before they join the cruise, their behaviour on board, and their compliance with good healthy hygiene practice. I've noticed the difference as a result of norovirus, for example, and our wishy-washy friends who meet us in the buffet as we approach in the morning. These are good, solid practices, and I think that we've got to be careful that we don't maintain this level of psychological fear of people coming on board. Is that we've got to try and restore as much back to normal as is possible, and it's really by these very subtle changes that can take place in catering and in proximity. And we haven't touched on entertainment as yet, but that's another area that time and proximity are an issue. But I think those are all solvable. But it really comes back to the viability of the cruise lines. If they have to reduce numbers to achieve that, that could be the thing that kills the silver bullet, which there isn't one.
Yeah.
No silver bullet. I agree with Stephen. It's it's a combination of a number of interventions that collectively add to a solution.
Yeah. And I think to your point there, Erik, that we want to try to get back to as much of a normality as possible. We also have to be cognizant of the fact this is a vacation for people. You don't want them to feel as though they're walking around a hospital.
Absolutely.
So I think that's a very fine line to have to try to cross between keeping people safe, but also having it that it's still a vacation.
Yeah, and on that point, the cruise ship hospitality event is about just that. It's our strapline is delivering guest experience, because at the heart of cruising is guest experience. It's all about that delivering happiness to all of the passengers. And it's hard to do that if you're putting in all these measures that sort of take away from that guest experience. So it's, yeah, you're right, Michael. It's about, trying to make people confident, but at the same time, what you said, Steve, remembering you're on holiday, right?
Correct.
And I think actually that of course depends a lot on the type of vessel you are at. I mean, if we think about, let's say, for example, expedition vessels, Hurtigruten, any of the Galapagos, any smaller expedition vessel. I mean, there it is. A lot of the time, you are spending, looking outside, at the landscapes, the nature, so that's really the experience, and that can be quite easily achieved, with social distancing. You don't have on the smaller ships, you don't have that many people. You can see if you have an outside cabin or a balcony cabin, you can enjoy the nature from out there as well. But then when you go to these big typical mega ships that are the trend in the Caribbean and the Mediterranean also at the moment. I mean, there it's a lot about, you go to the surfing simulator, you go to the pool, you have all sorts of different stuff, which is a lot of fun, but where it's very difficult to actually keep your physical distance and not touch things. So the experience, like the market is very wide. There's very, very different experiences out there. So some of them, they might be much more easily converted to this new post-COVID-19 world than others.
That's true.
Absolutely. So the next thing I want to talk about, guys, is the future of room service. So we're talking a lot about the future of the buffet. The layout of the restaurant could change. Are we going to see more people want to dine inside their room, Steve?
I think initially, yes, that will be a offering from the various cruise lines. Again, that's one of these ones that from the start, it will give passengers comfort that they can dine in their own cabin. They don't have to socialize. It'll feel safer for them. So yes, I think that will be something that cruise lines will be offering a lot more of. We talked about it very briefly before coming online. I mean, it is a major offering from the Virgin brand that they are offering this as standard throughout their ships. So I think it'll definitely be something which will be, from a passenger perspective, utilized more.
Yeah. But with that comes a huge logistical challenge. And Erik, you guys, as I said before, experts in galley construction. How does a cruise line serve thousands of passengers all wanting to dine in their room at the same time? I mean, that becomes a logistical nightmare, right?
Well, that's correct. I mean, I wish I had some answer for that. And again, we come to the point. I mean, if the vessel has been built, with this kind of dining concept in mind, then it's certainly doable. Again, on smaller ships, it's easier because, but then on your typical large ship, which has been revolving around, all these different dining venues around the ship, plus maybe 1-2 large dining rooms based on the buffet concept, well, then it becomes very, very difficult because, I mean, often you don't have enough pantries available on the vessel, and just getting the food from the main galley or the main galleys to the rooms, that will be very challenging. So I mean, there is no quick and easy answer to that. I mean, it's there's so many constraints in the whole logistics. It's about being able to offer, first of all, actually produce all those meals, being able to get them to the right place. Do you have enough corridors for to transport them? Do you have enough elevator capacity for them? Do you have enough pantries, in case you need to stock them, reheat, whatever. So it's certainly something that cannot be done overnight. And it's something that maybe we see that when we start to refurbish some of the older vessels, there will be more of a focus on that. But again, it takes away other revenue space. It's expensive to do, and adding new elevator capacity on an existing ship it's not impossible. I used to work for an elevator company before, but it's extremely expensive and extremely difficult to do. So the logistics challenges certainly won't be solved overnight.
No.
And Michael.
Sorry, just to add on to what Erik's saying there. I think the traditional method of room service will not be what we will see utilized, where food would be brought to the room on a tray with covers on them. I think it's going to have to be more of a sealed container that will be used. I know on the Virgin ships, I saw it a few weeks back when I was on board. They have like a sack type of affair that they use to bring the food to the rooms, that it's all sealed within this bag. I think they call it ship eats.
That's right, yeah.
Yep, that they use. So I don't think that it'll be your standard tray system. It'll be a completely different method of transport to the rooms.
Yeah, absolutely. And Michael, I was just going to comment, ask you on that topic. You know, what from a health point perspective, and you know, bringing down the risk of contracting the virus, what's the difference between having someone bring food to your room, eating in your room at your own leisure, and wearing a face mask into a restaurant and then socially distancing? You've got nobody around you, your food's brought to you in the same way. I know that there's a psychological thing, but is there any difference in risk?
Oh, that's a tricky question. I would tend to err on the side of the psychological aspects here. It's vacation time, it's experience. I don't want to be stuck in a room.
Yeah.
I think we have to work backwards from the experience and look at the risk factors in delivering that. I mean, one thing that came to mind, maybe a little bit of mobility over the main swimming pool. You could have a wonderful al fresco dining area set up there that you can expand your capacity for dealing with people in a different way. I'm not sure you can roast a pig on board, but there you go. So yeah, I mean, we are risk adverse, but we can't allow it to ruin what the core essence of a cruise experience is. And I don't want to diminish the impact of COVID, but it is in this moment, and we have to be prepared for it in the future. That if we live with it constantly, we are destroying a very valuable opportunity to live. So I'm being a little bit philosophical here, but I think there's probably more value in understanding our customer and probably in demographic segmenting of those in terms of how you would actually set up the ship with older people and younger families, because you're looking at different experience expectations. And that could be a strategy to manage it a little bit easier. But I don't think there's one answer. As Stephen was saying before, there is no single answer. And I'm sure that there would be a few people that would enjoy the fact that they can hide in their cabin and feel safe. But to me, that's not the experience that they're paying for.
Yeah, absolutely. So guys, I'm just going to head on to the next area. I mean, realize we've been speaking for that time, but there's so much still to talk about. So hopefully you guys can stick with us for the Q&A as well. I want to talk about technology, because you know, there's been a lot of talk about things that the cruise lines need to do in order to get back to sailing. Things like touchless key systems, so not having to touch the doors to get into rooms. Cashless payments. I mean, that's the future anyway. Do you guys believe that all of the things that we're going to implement in the cruise industry from a technology point of view, do you think that was going to happen anyway? Or do you think that we're being reactive and having to do these things reluctantly? Steve, what would you say?
I think it was going to happen anyway.
Good.
I think the industry, you can see it moving in that direction. Again, Virgin have the touchless key system for entry to the room.
Those guys have got everything.
You have it where Princess have this medallion that they use. I believe it's used for payment system and booking of shore excursions type of thing. You can also look at the technology via the TV in the room now, that you can go on and book shore excursions through it. Various other things that can be done via that system. I think it's just a natural technological, that's a large word for Tuesday, technological advance, and that cruise lines will adapt them, and we're beginning to adapt them anyway. It may just be the case that this will increase the speed that they are actually brought on board.
Yeah. And we hear a lot about sort of, voice activated technology. I mean, we've got Alexas all around the office. He's probably going to go off now, but in home, do you think that would also reduce the touch points, being able to just say what you want? Alexa, book me a table at, this restaurant, or Erik, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I mean, I pretty much agree 100% with what Stephen had to say. So this is maybe more of a technology accelerator than anything else. I mean, there hasn't been any new technological breakthroughs. It's just we're just applying technology that was already coming up. But regarding voice, I mean, sure, yes, I believe it's going to happen more and more. But I mean, one thing we have to remember also is that, I mean, it depends on the cruise line. I mean, for the main market, so let's say, for example, Caribbean cruises out of the US, cruises around for UK guests and so on. I mean, there it's going to be quite easy to implement. But then if you look at some of the cruise lines, like for example Costa, I mean, whenever you go on board a Costa ship, I mean, you got a lot of Italians, you got your French, you got your German passengers, you got Swiss, you got Austrian. So I mean, everybody speaks a different language with a different accent. So that's like so voice activation there is, I mean, somebody who is not a non-native English speaker. I mean, I noticed that, for example, I mean, even the most advanced like Alexa or Siri for Apple, they work pretty well when I'm talking English. But I mean, if I try to use some other language with them, especially a more exotic one, like for example Finnish or Swedish, I mean, the user experience is absolutely awful. I mean, it just doesn't work for those smaller language groups.
So you're showing off by speaking so many languages. So clever.
So yes, I think it's coming in a nutshell, but again, it has to be ship and market specific.
Yeah. And Michael, just a question for you. You've done a lot of work in the healthcare sector. Are you seeing any technology that's going to be coming into the cruise business that has already been used in medical and hospitals?
Medical are kind of slow adopters to a lot of technology within the facilities. I think the commercial environment is the driver in this, in terms of high-rise buildings. Potentially, with working from home, there is quite a number of issues to be addressed by building owners and investors. Excuse me. I think what we're talking about is the Internet of Things, where everything is connected, and we can basically mine that data to extract from it what we will. So you have the operational aspects for the individual, but we learn from the building itself and how people are using it. And from our perspective in healthcare or wellness, we're looking at mining that data for the purpose of infection prevention, creating algorithms where we understand how the building is actually being utilized and where the risk factors and critical control points are, so that we can manage risk much better. So yeah, I think there's a push. The technology, some of it is there already. Some of it is now being assembled by new networks. I think Bluetooth mesh is sort of showing up as being desirable. It's not interfering with existing Wi-Fi arrangements. And that can be linked quite easily into a main data collection system. So I think within the very foreseeable future, we will start to see smart buildings, smart facilities, smart chips emerging.
Absolutely.
Would agree.
So at the moment then, guys, there's a lot of companies, there's a lot of suppliers that are trying to break into the market. Steve, you've done a lot of work with the brands themselves in sourcing and finding and giving them your opinion on that. Where are the cruise lines going to find these companies, and how are they sort of filtering through the ones that they don't need to work with and the ones they do?
From what I'm hearing from colleagues, they're being inundated. I know of one cruise line with over 250 companies have contacted them with various options for solutions. I think they will most likely stick with their tried and trusted companies that they've worked with in the past. The likes of Erik's team would be one, and the various other companies out there that the cruise lines work with. I don't see them jumping onto a new technology, a new system straight away with somebody new that is not proven or has got the science or the data backing it up.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it'll be through their existing network of suppliers.
Yeah. And Erik, what would you say on that? Are you seeing more companies come to you guys to want to partner with you to get into the market?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we have been trying to be proactive, of course, as well. But I mean, yes, we do have a lot of contacts. Actually, at the moment, I see the issue is a little bit. You know, there's so many technologies out there, many of them proven in different landside applications, some even on some ships. But it's very because a lot of this, you actually, I mean, this is new to both the cruise lines and to the companies like us who actually are distributing these solutions. Is that filtering, you know, selecting the right partners, getting the right technologies is not that easy, and you actually need to have somebody, you know, who has a proper scientific background to look into those as well. And I have to say, I mean, there's a ton of really good solutions out there, you know, companies which, you know, have just been, you know, I think should have been in the market already before, but there is also a lot of different snake oil merchants out there, you know, even in some, I'm not talking about total hoaxes, but I mean something that, you know, let's put it this way, I mean, there's a valid scientific basis, but then somebody over interprets, you know, the results of something, and that is exactly, the situation is developing so quickly, and there's so much out there that it's very difficult, you know, to see if you're betting on the right horse. And that's also why we have been a little bit careful, you know, I mean, you know, in selecting our partners, also, you know, trying to find out, you know, that is this something, you know, I mean, first of all, is there a scientific basis? Is this a sound company to work with? Are we comfortable distributing this? And can you actually apply it on a ship? Like, for example, those filters we talked about. I mean, if it's the best technology, but you cannot implement it, it's not really very worthwhile.
Absolutely. And Michael, on that topic, I mean, you do some work with some suppliers in the industry. Do you get companies that come to you that you sort of think, do you know what, I'm going to just work with a couple of core companies?
Yes, I think it's you need to have relationships in place, and they understand. Sorry, I'm suffering from hay fever and allergies. Excuse me. Yeah, I mean, it comes back to understanding what you can achieve with a particular technology. And I'm not necessarily jumping towards the leading edge. I think sometimes it's good to go back to the basics and revisit, you know, the fundamentals of cleaning and disinfection. You know, that a lot of our work in healthcare is that we were looking at water-based technologies. But we had an environmental agenda as well as a sustainability issue, and things like microfiber, steam cleaning, ultrasonic cleaning, all using water-based. So we're not, you know, driving antimicrobial resistance. I think if there was one thing that was sort of low tech that I wanted to invest in, it would be training of the staff who are actually maintaining the ship.
Yeah.
Heightened awareness, and more of the reason why are you doing this, not what are you doing. Sorry, I apologize for the voice going here.
Michael, you mentioned actually when we spoke before the session that you were sort of, I think it was an app. Was it an app that educates on hand washing or hand sanitation? Something like that. Something so basic, but actually just makes so much sense.
Yeah, no, this is an output from Trinity College in Dublin. It's a product called Wash, which came out of the computer sciences. And it's gesture recognition. So the camera on your phone or computer watches your hands, and it's calibrated against the perfect WHO hand wash. And it will actually guide you through learning it. And it's a very well studied subject. It's not just a technology, it's a psychology. That has been studied as well. How do you teach people, and how do people learn to do a particular discipline? You know, we learn how to tie our shoes when we're young in our tie as we get older, but we forget to learn how to do some technical things, you know, manually after that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, guys, the final topic I want to talk about is the future. So I'm getting a bit of bounce back. So the future of the business. Now, we're seeing a lot of the cruise lines have their own private islands. Steve, do you think this is going to be something that they will use even more so they can control their own environment? Do you think private islands will be a destination on every trip?
I mean, they pretty much are in the Caribbean. Every
Yeah.
cruise line that goes out stops at its own island at least for one day.
Okay.
I think initially it may well be the case that given the limitations of places that they can possibly go to,
Yeah.
you will see that the island will maybe be something that they will go to for 2 days. They may even do an overnight at the island. But again, I think it will be a short-term solution. I don't see it as being a long-term solution. Again, because of the fact, you got to remember, it's a vacation. Part of the allure and the fun of getting on a cruise for people is that in a 7-day cruise, you can hit 4 to 5 different places, and experience different cultures, different foods, etc. during that time period. So initially, it's probably in the thinking to utilize the islands more, but long term, I don't see it as being a solution to them.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. And then Erik, a question for you then is, if we look at the new build market, do you think that there is going to be a big shift in the way that we design the spaces? So we talked about outdoor seating areas for the restaurants. We talked about, perhaps larger cabins to accommodate, in-room dining. Is there anything that you would comment on that? Do you think there's anything that we're likely to see in the next sort of 5 years and on?
I think it's a little bit early to say at the moment, as we're still in the thick of this. I mean, there will be changes definitely, but I mean, it's I believe all of those things we discussed about, they will happen, but there's a limit. There's a limit. I mean, I personally, I don't believe that the basic layout of a cruise ship there won't be a revolution. There will be many different steps of evolution, but there will not be a revolution. And one thing, and this is something which I have been trying to propagate a little bit lately, is that there should be just like we have SOLAS and we have the USPH guidelines, for food sanitation and hygiene, there should be something industry-wide, like a minimum industry-wide level, which all the different cruise lines should adhere to. Because at the moment, it seems like, everybody's a little bit, everybody has to work with the authorities, that's for sure. But everybody is proposing a little bit different solution. Everybody's going a little bit different way. Sure, RCCL and NCL, they are now working together. Carnival has their own program. And Virgin has their own. So there's a lot of different solutions out there. To be honest, nobody really knows yet. There is no complete proof which is the best. But having some sort of minimum standard so that everybody really, there's a sort of like a level playing field set out there. I'm not very positive that will happen. Maybe it will. But coming back to the original question, there will be an evolution thing. All of those things will happen, but they will. I don't see, the basic cruise experience going through a complete transformation.
Yeah, and Michael, on the topic of USPH and CDC guidelines, have we got any sort of idea on how that's going to look? Have we got, is there anything that's out there yet on how things could change?
Well, sorry, I just missed the first part of the question with my earphone going off.
On the topic of USPH and the CDC guidelines, is there anything that relates to cruise that we know that we'll need to do in terms of guidelines from the government?
Not as that I've seen as yet. I think that there's still sort of an underlying investigation needs to take place with regards to these types of epidemics and pandemics. Obviously, we had Zika, a few years ago, and which was much more localized. But I don't think the virus is fully understood at this point in time, and I think it's a matter of being pragmatic. But I agree. I don't see the future of the cruise line being dramatically different. It has its own unique character, and that's got to be preserved. And I think basic risk assessment and looking at common sense and behavioural activity and engaging with the passenger in a more meaningful way, that they have a very strong responsibility in terms of their conduct on board and following guidelines and regulations of how they interact, with the facility and with their colleague or their passengers on board. I think it's more of a behavioural challenge than it is in the physical, to be honest.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, guys, thank you very much. I'm going to now head to the Q&A. So we've got quite a lot of questions that have been sent in to me. I'm going to read them. So apologies if I. Okay, so the first question is from Lewis from Hvac Systems, good friend of the show. How will cruise lines and operators adapt to the new expectations from passengers with regards to sanitizing and disinfecting of all soft and hard surfaces? What products will be used to fulfill these expectations? He's put constant disinfecting and cleaning of soft surfaces will reduce the fabric's lifetime, requiring them to use more resistant fabrics and changing them more frequently. So I suppose that's a question for Steve. We'll go to you. Do we have an idea on what sort of products will be used?
I'm sure there are products out there that are being looked at for sure. What those products are, because there is a myriad of choices, will depend on the cruise lines themselves, what the design of the vessels are, because again, it comes down to not everything's going to be suitable for every single cruise line. So, and it'll be also, the design teams, when they begin looking at venues, they go through the color palettes and looking at that. So again, it'll be what materials are available and what color selections, etc., they have within their range will determine also which ones are used and where. So I think it's going to be sort of various companies that will be used. Again, it's not going to be a single company which is going to have capture the market, shall we say.
Well, it would be quite nice. Yeah. Guys, would you add that on the subject of sort of the materials that will be used to clean the fabrics? Any comment on that?
My own view is that I think that they will be very careful as to what chemicals, etc., they do use. Obviously, chemicals will wash colors out of fabrics, etc. So you don't want that, because that will necessitate having to change the fabrics more often than they would like to. And I think there's also more of a conscious awareness of the general public of chemicals and their use. So I don't think they're going to be wanting to be using harsh chemicals, shall we say, in these cleaning systems, because that will not go over well with the general public. And then there's the odor aspect to it also, and the possibility that, there's maybe still some of it left on a fabric. You sit on it and your dress or your trousers get bleached out or whichever, so.
Not a good start to the holiday, is it? Erik, Michael, would you add anything to that?
I mean, there are fabrics out there which are designed for healthcare, and particularly when you look at the care home type facility where they're trying to create a much more homely environment. But obviously, with the demographic they're serving, the designs are perhaps quite not what the designers and cruise ships would like. But that means, that doesn't mean they can't receive them. I mean, obviously, these are very big facilities and could have custom manufactured materials. So the actual substrate itself and the manufacture process exists for basically healthcare quality cleaning, where you may have to use disinfectants, and obviously yarn systems which are resistant to a lot of these chemicals. But I agree. I think we have to aim and differentiate between what is cleaning and what is disinfecting, and not over disinfect because of the impact environmentally and on the exposure to individuals who are going into that cabin very, very close to the end of that process. There's no aeration, if you will.
The next question is from another good friend of the show, Enrico Capetta. Windstar Cruises is the first cruise line to announce today that they will be using UVC light disinfection systems to clean the air and the areas around the ship. What are the panelists' thoughts on these technologies? Reports show that they have been proven to be highly effective in hospitals to prevent the spread of microbes. Erik.
Yeah, well, I mean, UVC lights are that technology as well, and I mean, the fact is, it's a proven technology. It works, and I mean, UV lights are used, for example, I mean, to disinfect ambulances after a COVID patient has been transported there. So the UVC lights, I mean, proven technology. It certainly works. I see two downsides with this technology. The first is that you need to install these UVC lights in all the areas you wish to disinfect with them. So that's, of course, you need to take the ceilings down, you need to install a new cabling, new light control units, etc. So there's a cost involved with that. And the second thing, and I have to say, I'm not really an expert here, but I mean, it's not exposure to, let's say, low power UVC lights is definitely not as dangerous as, high power UVA or UVB radiation. So it's not like being out, for example, well, now it's not sunny here in Florida, but being out here in the Florida sun in the but still, I have understood that very lengthy exposure that would mostly apply to crew members, actually, that it can cause harm to skin and eyes like any other UV radiation. But Michael is probably better poised to answer that. The only thing I'll add here is that that when you combine UVC lights with a photocatalytic coating, you actually get much higher effect from the combination of both than just using either the nano coating or the UVC lights without the coating.
Michael, would you add to the point on UVC?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. It's a synergistic effect between technologies that you can actually get that effect, and I think it's much more of a strategic tool that has limited use. The problem we have within healthcare is the number of cycles that you can complete. The disinfection power is directly related to distance, and so to be able to have robots, for example, running around the place, the number of cycles that you could complete would be nominal. I think the passive within the HVAC system is much more effective and would provide a much better result. And at the same time, I think from a bang for your buck is, the old hospital way of disinfection was open the windows and push the patients outside into the sunlight. Is the natural world is actually a great disinfector if we allow it to happen. I'm not a great fan of throwing a lot of UVC around here. Strategically, it can be used very well in very specific cases, but I don't see it collectively being it's not a silver bullet, certainly, for the cruise ship environment.
Okay.
I mean, maybe I'll just one more thing. I mean, just like Michael said, I mean, I think it makes sense in areas where you have the highest risk. So let's say, for example, a buffet area would be, but I mean, I would not, splash UVC lights around in cabins and that kind of places. I just don't see, it being, it's not cost effective for that.
Okay. Okay, next question then is, we've got a few from anonymous ones in the comments, so people that have typed and not left who they wanted to be put down as. But this one's an interesting one. How do you see the cruise lines protecting the crew from things like COVID? The cruise lines have been very vocal re passenger measures, but are there any additional protocols that can be implemented to keep the crew protected? Steve, what do you reckon?
That's a very good question.
It is a good question.
It's very good. It's something that I have not seen anything yet in any of the trade websites or conversations that are going around as to how that will be tackled. It has always been with regards to addressing the passenger safety.
Yeah.
I would like to think, and I'm sure they are, looking at the crew. Very good question as to what they are planning. I really can't answer because I have not seen anything out there yet as to what people are, or what the lines are thinking about.
I think the whole, the crew mental health welfare has been, the cruise lines have been very vocal about that recently, just, getting them home, making sure they get back to their, their home country. So I would imagine that they are on that. That must be a very high priority of theirs anyway.
I would think so. Yeah.
Would you?
I would think so.
Sorry, Erik, anything on that?
No. I was just nodding in agreement with Steven. So.
You're having a good think about that. Okay. Michael, on that topic of the crew, then, is there anything that you've seen that they're going to be using to protect the crew that maybe hasn't been spoken about for the passengers?
No, I'm not aware of anything, and it probably, in my opinion, is the greatest challenge because of the close proximity of the staff, the number of staff, and their access to outside fresh air, etc. That you're very much reliant on the service systems on board, and obviously they're in very close contact not only between themselves but also with the passengers. So they're basically a moving fomite, if I can use that term. That if they were infected, they would be a very dangerous individual moving around the facility, and their interaction in their duty. So I mean, in principle, they are the ones that should be most protected because they're there full time, delivering the service to the paying passengers. But I don't have any ideas, and I've never had the opportunity of visiting that part of the ship to actually have any perception of how challenging that would be, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay, the next question is from someone called Summer. Reports are saying that because of the measures and the nature of the cruise, they will actually become one of the safest place to be when you travel. Do you guys agree with that statement, that cruising can become actually more safer than being at a hotel or on an airplane? Steve?
Yes. I've always thought it was the safest place. Unfortunately, I'm going to sort of diversify here a little. The cruise industry got a very bad rap from the press. And I think the reason for that was because the data was available as to the number of passengers that did get infected. It's not known how many people from hotels or from air travel became infected and then went home and infected others, because that data is not available. It was for the cruise lines. And I think that's why the press found it an easy target to pick on, because they could back their data up. So I believe that the cruise lines always have been a very safe place to travel. Their cleaning systems and methods have been exemplary and above and beyond many land-based hotels, restaurants, dining facilities, etc. So yes, I would say that it's definitely a safe bet that when they go back into operation, the protocols that they will have in place will be above and beyond.
Yeah. Michael, would you comment on that?
I'd agree completely. I think that the cruise line industry has learned some very severe lessons from the experience with norovirus. And, from my observations on several different cruises, is that their conduct and quality of service is impeccable. And that includes all of the hygiene aspects. And, I have floated around the ship. I'm a very sad person. I've got up at 4 in the morning to see what they're doing, just out of curiosity, and, watching decontamination of the restaurants when they're closed down. And, I had the permission to observe that. So I think I agree. It is a very safe place. I think it's all about people and understanding those people who want to use the service. And as I say, I really think there's something in this separation of demographics that may play a very interesting role in the way in which the cruise lines could operate and schedule the types of cruises that they may put together. But yes, they're definitely safe places to be. It's just unfortunate that one person can be the start of something. And SARS-CoV is an extraordinary impact on our well-being, and it's a thunderbolt. We just never planned for it, and the asymptomatic issue has been the critical factor that's actually allowed it to become so severe.
Yeah. So the next question is from another anonymous one. Do you see some brands finding it harder to return to sailing than others? For example, Disney, who cater to families with children, where measures may be harder to implement. Erik.
Oh, good question. Yes, I think that's going to be the case, but I'm not so sure if Disney is really standing out there. I think it's it's about the demographics, but it's also about the source markets. I mean, we see that in Norway the cruises have started. Pana is doing expedition vessels out of Iceland. We have cruises in Germany starting. So essentially, I think it's a lot also about how each source market has been able to contain COVID. And unfortunately, here being based here in Florida, I have to say, which is also the largest cruise market, that the situation at the moment is not nearly as good as in Germany or Norway, for example, at the moment. So it might have an impact also for those cruise lines who cater a lot to more senior people, since they are more affected by COVID. I don't think I really have any definitive answer for that, but I think I see it rather than the demographics. I see it just the ability of the source market and let's say the neighboring markets. For example, it's safe to go on a cruise from Germany to Denmark and Norway, but taking a cruise from Florida to the Caribbean at the moment is obviously it's much more difficult to make it to contain COVID on something like this. So it's about the source market mainly.
Yeah. And Mike, would you comment on that?
No, that's an interesting thought. Yeah, I mean, it comes back to the safe countries and exposure to those areas. I say there is an issue of susceptibility of individuals, and that's really where I'm thinking about demographics. Is the cohort scenario where you could actually have the ship set up in a slightly different way, to merge families and older people. Because historically, as I understand it, it's older people who have the money and spend a good amount of money on the cruise ships and keep everybody employed. Whereas the younger families, it's more of a vacation type process. But yeah, I really don't have an answer. It's all about the risk factors, and you really have to drill down on where, how big is the ship, where is it going to, which ports is it going to, what are people doing out in those ports, and then returning back to the home base of the cruise ship. Those are the risk factors.
Yeah. Steve, anything to add, or are you?
No, I mean, I think both Erik and Michael have answered the question very well, and I would concur with everything they've said. The only other comment I would say to that is that I think whatever is going to work into what Michael has been saying with regards to its education of people, with regards to safe practices. I mean, I don't think it matters whether it's children or elderly people. Those safe practices still should be followed and should be the principle behind keeping people safe.
Yeah. Yeah. Next question here is actually one that we were meant to cover off earlier, but I left it as it was a question is, what is the future of the casino on board a ship? Will there still be cards dealt, or will everything become touchless or via technology? Steve, come on, you've got an opinion on this one, I know.
I don't see the cards going away. Good. I think that's part of the game. It's why people go to gamble. I personally don't, but it's the feel of the cards. Are you feeling lucky holding them? Whatever. I don't know. I don't think the cards are going to go away. I think maybe the number of packs that will be changed out will increase of an evening, but yeah, I don't think it's going to change a great deal.
Yeah, and Michael, to answer that from a scientific standpoint, then, what is there any harm in dealing cards with if the croupier is wearing gloves and the?
I think if everybody goes in there with clean hands and you've got a clean environment, the likelihood of cross contamination is low. Just keep your hands away from your face. Just keep your poker face on and play the game.
It's easier said than done, keeping your hands away from your face. I tried to do it for, I think, 10 minutes once, and yeah, it didn't work. It's just constantly doing this or this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. You only have to say it, and everybody's nose starts twitching.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. Final question then, guys. Do the panel think that technology will be used to support the compliance of these measures? like the Princess Cruises medallion, which could notify housekeeping when the stateroom is vacant, for example. That's from Mark Dowling. Steve, what do you think about that?
Absolutely. I think
Yeah.
it will. It can also be used not just to notify when guests have left the cabin. You could also use it if you do have an outbreak, that you could use it for as a contact tracer. Where has that person been? Who have they been close to? So yes, I think absolutely that will be the case. I think it's just whether the technology is there in the medallion, etc. at this moment is the bigger question.
Yeah. Michael?
I'm not familiar. I read a little bit about the description of a medallion, and yes, it is the future. It's something that we're looking at in terms of people with their IDs in commercial buildings. Is you can track and trace people's activity in that building in a secure way that's not breaching any confidentiality. But if you need to, you can interrogate their activity.
Yeah, and just a question on that then. Do you think that there'll be a need for some sort of temperature monitoring, like the medallion? So, for example, you wear it and it can sense if you've got a fever, and then that will alert the crew. Do you think that, Michael, would that work if you've got someone asymptomatic, for example? That's just out the window. But do you think that's likely we'll be using that?
I think it's a difficult value to consider, to be honest. That people overheat for many reasons, and you don't want to be arresting people on board because their temperature is slightly elevated. As I say, I don't think it's a suitable intervention, to be honest. But that's a personal opinion. I know there's science about it, and I've experienced it in airports for screening. But again, it's the cruise ship experience. I think that social responsibility. If you're not feeling well, stay in your cabin. If you still don't feel well after a period of time, report yourself to the medical staff.
Excellent. Okay, guys, that is all from us today. Thank you so much. I thought that was going to be well out my depth there, but I actually really enjoyed that one. So, guys, thanks for joining us. We actually ran half an hour over, which goes to show how much we covered. If anyone has any questions that we didn't ask, please send them by email, webinar@elite-exhibitions.com, and then we'll reach out to the panelists after, and we'll just make sure we cover all your questions off. But from me, from the guys, thank you so much for joining us. Do you guys want to finish with saying anything you want to tell the viewers that we've got?
Just want to say thank you, Toby, for putting this on. You and your team do a fantastic job. So thanks for the opportunity to be involved. It was a fun experience.
Yeah, Erik?
Not much to add there. I mean, I've really enjoyed this despite the early technical issues. But I mean, hey, thank you very much, and it has been a privilege to discuss this with guys like Michael and Stephen.
Yeah. And Michael, finally.
Certainly, I think it's all been said. I think it's been a very enjoyable and informative experience. I've learned a lot, actually. So I've got a whole new mindset now in terms of cruising, and I'm certainly looking forward to returning to a cruise ship in the not too distant future.
Absolutely. And Steve, if you could kindly get the refurbishment market going again, that would be great.
I will do what I can.
Okay.
Good
luck.
Thanks for joining us. Thanks to everyone at home. Have a good evening.
Everyone.
You're welcome.
See you next time.
Bye.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Bye for now.